Chess, a game that has captivated minds for centuries, was not just a pastime, but a symbol of strategy and intellect in medieval Europe. Originating in India as chaturanga and evolving through Persia to reach the European courts by the 10th century, chess became a favorite among nobility and clergy alike. The game's popularity soared during the Middle Ages, as it offered a way for rulers and scholars to test their mental prowess. In medieval Europe, chess was more than just a board game. It was a reflection of society itself. The pieces on the board mirrored the hierarchical structure of feudal life. Kings, queens, bishops, knights, rooks, and pawns each represented different classes. The king, though powerful, could not win alone. He relied on his advisors, soldiers, and commoners to protect him and achieve victory. This metaphorical representation made chess an ideal tool for teaching leadership, strategy, and the importance of teamwork. Chess tournaments were held across Europe, often sponsored by wealthy patrons or royal families. These events attracted players from all over the continent, showcasing their skills and earning admiration from spectators. One of the most famous chess masters of the time was Abu Bakr Muhammad bin Yahya al-Adli, who lived in Baghdad during the 9th century. His legacy influenced European chess culture, spreading knowledge of advanced strategies and opening moves. Despite its noble origins, chess also found its way into everyday life. Peasants and townsfolk played simplified versions of the game, using whatever materials they had at hand: stones, seeds, or even carved wooden pieces. These informal games provided entertainment and a sense of community, allowing people to escape the harsh realities of daily life. As the Middle Ages progressed, chess became intertwined with art, literature, and philosophy. Paintings and manuscripts depicted scenes of people playing chess, while poets wrote verses celebrating the game's complexity. Even religious leaders saw value in chess, believing it could sharpen the mind and prepare individuals for spiritual contemplation. However, chess was not without controversy. Some church leaders condemned the game, fearing it would distract believers from their faith. In 1061, Pope Innocent IV issued a decree banning chess in monasteries, claiming it encouraged gambling and idleness. Despite such opposition, chess remained popular, adapting to local customs and evolving over time. By the late Middle Ages, chess had become a global phenomenon, influencing cultures far beyond Europe. Its enduring appeal lies in its ability to challenge the mind while reflecting the human experience. Today, we can still see echoes of medieval chess in modern tournaments, online platforms, and even AI-powered opponents. In the heart of medieval Europe, among castles and courtly life, one spectacle stood above all others: the jousting tournament. More than just a battle on horseback, it was a grand affair of honor, strength, and pageantry. Kings and nobles gathered to witness knights clad in shining armor charge at each other with lances, hoping to unhorse their opponent and win glory. Jousting wasn't just for war practice, it was entertainment at its finest. These tournaments were held in vast fields or within the walls of royal courts, drawing crowds from near and far. Nobles sat in elevated stands while commoners lined the fences, cheering for their favorite champions. The clash of steel, the thundering hooves, the roar of the crowd. It was the ultimate medieval sport. Each knight entered the lists not only to prove his skill, but also to earn prestige and sometimes even land or titles. Winning a tournament could elevate a lesser-known knight into royal favor, opening doors that would otherwise remain closed. Ladies watched from balconies, often offering tokens like scarves or rings as symbols of support, an early form of fandom. The rules of jousting evolved over time, but the core remained the same. Two mounted knights charged at each other with blunted lances, aiming to strike their opponent's shield or body with enough force to knock them from their horse. A successful hit could send a man flying, sometimes breaking bones or knocking him unconscious. It was dangerous, yes, but that only added to the thrill. Tournaments weren't just about jousting. They often included melees, chaotic group battles where knights fought in teams, showcasing their swordsmanship and agility. There were foot combats, archery contests, and even mock sieges. Each event tested different skills, ensuring that no single type of warrior had dominance. But beyond the spectacle, jousting served a deeper purpose. It trained knights for real combat, sharpening their reflexes and reinforcing chivalric values like courage, loyalty, and discipline. It also reinforced social order. Only those of noble birth could truly participate, keeping the lower classes firmly in their place. Preparation for tournament was intense. Knights trained daily, practicing their aim, balance, and timing. Their squires polished armor, checked saddle straps, and ensured every piece of equipment was battle-ready. Even the horses were specially bred for speed and endurance. Destriers, powerful war horses, were prized above all. Despite the risks, jousting remained wildly popular across Europe for centuries. It inspired poetry, songs, and legends, shaping the image of the ideal knight in both history and myth. And though the age of chivalry has long passed, echoes of these grand tournaments still live on, in modern reenactments, fantasy stories, and even sports today. Long before firearms ruled the battlefield, there was one weapon that could decide the fate of entire wars: the longbow. In medieval Europe, archery wasn't just a skill. It was a matter of national survival, especially in England, where kings mandated its practice under penalty of law. Imagine yourself as a common soldier in the 14th century. You're not a noble knight clad in shining armor. You're a yeoman farmer by birth, an archer by duty. From childhood, you've trained with the longbow, pulling back its massive weight until your muscles screamed for mercy. By the time you reached adulthood, your body bore the marks of years of training: thickened fingers, uneven shoulders, and even skeletal deformities caused by the constant strain. This wasn't just sport. This was war. The English longbow was a marvel of medieval engineering. Up to 6 feet tall, made from wood, and capable of launching arrows at deadly speeds. A skilled archer could fire up to 10 arrows per minute, faster than most modern rifles. At battles like Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, thousands of these arrows rained down on enemy forces, piercing armor, killing horses, and turning the tide of history. But how did ordinary men become such deadly marksmen? Archery was more than just a military necessity. It was a national obsession. In 1363, King Edward III passed a law requiring all able-bodied men between the ages of 16 and 60 to practice archery every Sunday and holiday. Towns built special archery ranges called butts, and failure to attend could result in fines or even imprisonment. The government wanted a standing army of archers ready at a moment's notice. Training wasn't easy. Drawing a longbow required immense strength, often over 100 pounds a pull. Beginners started with lighter bows and worked their way up, sometimes spending years perfecting their form. They learned to judge wind, distance, and trajectory, aiming not directly at their targets, but high into the sky, so arrows would fall like hail. Competition was fierce. Archery contests were held during festivals and fairs, drawing large crowds who cheered for their local champions. Prizes ranged from silver coins to barrels of ale, and winning a match could bring fame and fortune. Some archers became minor celebrities, traveling from town to town, testing their skills against the best. But beyond the competitions and laws, archery also played a role in daily life. Hunters used short bows and crossbows to feed their families. Farmers used them to protect crops from wild animals. Even city guards carried bows as part of their arsenal. The longbow's dominance lasted centuries, shaping the outcome of countless battles. But as gunpowder changed warfare, the age of the archer faded into history. Still, the legacy of medieval archery lives on, in modern sports, historical reenactments, and the enduring fascination with the bow as a symbol of precision, power, and tradition. Before Hollywood, before Broadway, and even before Shakespeare, medieval Europe had its own form of dramatic storytelling: the morality play. These weren't just performances for entertainment. They were lessons wrapped in drama, designed to teach moral values, religious truths, and life lessons to an audience that often couldn't read. Imagine yourself in a crowded town square, surrounded by merchants, farmers, and nobles alike. A wooden stage has been set up, and performers dressed as angels, devils, and ordinary men act out a tale that feels both familiar and otherworldly. This is the world of medieval morality plays, a mix of theater, sermon, and spectacle. Unlike today's movies or novels, these plays didn't follow a hero on a grand adventure. Instead, they personified abstract ideas like good deeds, death, vice, and virtue. The most famous example, Everyman, tells the story of a man summoned by death to account for his life. He searches for companions to join him on his journey: fellowship, goods, knowledge, and even kindred, but only good deeds remains loyal. These plays were deeply rooted in Christian teachings. They warned audiences about sin, temptation, and the final judgment. In a time when most people never saw a Bible, let alone read one, morality plays brought religious lessons to life in a way everyone could understand. They were the medieval version of a viral message: powerful, easy to grasp, and unforgettable. But how did these plays reach so many people? They traveled. Unlike modern theater confined to a single venue, morality plays moved from town to town. Monks, traveling actors, and local guilds performed them during religious festivals, market days, and even royal celebrations. Some were staged on elaborate pageant wagons, mobile stages that allowed scenes to change as the wagon rolled through the streets. The characters were simple, almost cartoonish, making their lessons stick. Vice was always cunning and sly, tempting the protagonist with lies and tricks. Virtue was noble and wise, offering guidance and truth. The devil was loud, exaggerated, and often comically evil, not unlike today's movie villains. One of the most striking features of these plays was their direct engagement with the audience. Characters would step forward, speak to the crowd, and ask questions like, "What will you do when death comes knocking?" It made the message personal, forcing people to reflect on their own lives. Despite their serious themes, morality plays weren't boring. They used humor, music, and physical comedy to keep attention. The devil character, for instance, was often portrayed as a clumsy fool, slipping on imaginary banana peels or arguing with himself. Even in the darkest moments, there was laughter, making the lesson easier to swallow. And while the stories were fictional, their impact was real. People left these performances thinking about their choices, their sins, and their souls. Some even changed their behavior, inspired by what they had seen. Though morality plays faded with time, their influence never truly disappeared. Today's films, books, and even social media videos still use the same formula. A relatable character facing moral dilemmas, guided by good and tempted by evil. The message may have evolved, but the structure remains timeless. So next time you watch a story where a character faces a choice between right and wrong, remember, you're witnessing the legacy of medieval morality plays, still shaping the way we tell stories. In the vast forests of medieval Europe, where sunlight filtered through dense canopies and wolves howled at night, hunting was more than just a way to put food on the table. It was a symbol of power, privilege, and prestige. For the nobility, hunting wasn't about survival. It was about status. Imagine yourself as a nobleman in 13th century France or England. You wake before dawn, dressed not for battle, but for sport. Your horse is saddled, your hounds are restless, and your falcon perches proudly on your gloved hand. Today is not a day for politics or governance. Today is a day for the hunt. For the wealthy elite, hunting was a carefully orchestrated ritual. It wasn't enough to simply chase down an animal. There were rules, traditions, and elaborate ceremonies that turned every outing into a grand affair. The forest was divided into royal hunting grounds, and only those with permission could enter. Unauthorized hunting was considered a serious crime, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or even death. The most prized quarry was the stag, strong, elusive, and symbolic of nobility itself. A successful hunt meant hours of tracking, chasing, and finally cornering the beast. The final kill was often ceremonial, performed with great fanfare and accompanied by cheers from the hunting party. To bring down a stag was to prove one's strength, skill, and dominance over nature. But stags weren't the only targets. Boars, deer, foxes, and even birds like herons and cranes were all part of the noble hunter's repertoire. Each had its own method of pursuit. Some required packs of trained hounds. Others demanded expert archery or the precision of a well-trained bird of prey. Falconry, known as the sport of kings, was particularly revered. Owning a trained falcon was a sign of wealth and sophistication. Nobles would spend years mastering the art of handling these birds, learning to read their moods, feed them properly, and fly them with precision. Hunting with a falcon was not just about catching game. It was about control, patience, and mastery. The preparation for a hunt was meticulous. Dogs were bred specifically for speed and endurance. Hounds like greyhounds chased down fast prey, while bloodhounds followed scent trails over long distances. Every noble estate maintained a kennel, and the master of the hunt held a position of high respect. Hunting wasn't just a solitary activity, it was a social event. Kings hosted grand hunts for visiting dignitaries, using them as opportunities to display their wealth, power, and hospitality. These events could last for days, featuring feasts, music, and storytelling around roaring fires after the day's excitement. Despite its glamour, hunting also served a practical purpose. Venison and other game meats were highly prized additions to the medieval diet, especially among the upper classes who avoided eating pork and beef regularly due to religious fasting rules. Fresh meat from the hunt was a luxury few commoners could afford. Yet, for all its beauty and tradition, hunting was not without controversy. The strict laws surrounding hunting grounds angered peasants, many of whom relied on poaching to survive. Forests once shared by all became the exclusive domain of the elite, guarded fiercely by royal foresters and wardens. Still, the allure of the hunt endured. It shaped literature, inspired poetry and became deeply embedded in the culture of medieval aristocracy. From illuminated manuscripts depicting hunters on horseback to epic tales of knights chasing mythical beasts, the legacy of medieval hunting lives on, not just in history books, but in our fascination with the wild, untamed world that once belonged to kings. Long before the invention of firearms, before even the rise of modern hunting rifles or crossbows, there was one bird that ruled the skies as both hunter and companion: the falcon. Falconry was not just a method of hunting. It was a symbol of nobility, skill, and power in medieval Europe. To own and train a falcon was to belong to an elite class, a privilege reserved for kings, nobles, and the highest ranks of society. It wasn't something peasants could afford, nor was it a pastime they had time for. Falconry required years of training, expensive equipment, and above all, patience. Imagine yourself in the courtyard of a grand castle, watching a nobleman dressed in fine leather and fur raise his gloved arm. Perched upon it is a bird of prey, silent, still, and deadly. With a flick of its wings and a piercing stare, this falcon is ready to hunt. The origins of falconry date back over 3,000 years, with early records found in ancient Mesopotamia and China. But it was in medieval Europe that the practice reached its peak, becoming deeply embedded in aristocratic culture. Owning a falcon was like owning a luxury car today. It showed wealth, status, and sophistication. Each type of falcon had its place in the hierarchy. The falcon, the largest and most powerful, was considered the king's bird. Only monarchs and the highest-ranking nobles were allowed to fly them. The peregrine falcon was used by knights and high-ranking lords, while smaller birds like the merlin were flown by ladies of the court. Training a falcon was no easy task. It began with manning, the process of getting the bird used to human presence. A newly captured falcon would be kept indoors for weeks, constantly handled and fed by hand. Every movement had to be slow and deliberate, building trust between man and bird. Once trained, the falcon became a formidable hunting partner. Unlike dogs, which chase prey on the ground, falcons struck from the sky, diving at incredible speeds to snatch their target mid-air. Their speed, precision, and silence made them the perfect hunters. The sport followed strict etiquette. Before a hunt, the falconer would check the weather. Wind direction and visibility were crucial. Then came the release. The bird would be sent into the air, circling above until it spotted its prey, often a pheasant, partridge, or hare. With a sudden dive, reaching speeds of up to 240 kilometers per hour, the falcon would strike, killing or stunning its target with a single blow. After the kill, the falconer would retrieve the prey and offer the first bite to the bird, a reward and a sign of respect. This bond between falconer and falcon was sacred, built on mutual trust and survival. Falconry wasn't just about hunting. It was also a way to impress guests, demonstrate control, and even send political messages. A well-trained falcon was a gift fit for royalty, and many treaties and alliances were strengthened through the exchange of rare birds. The tools of falconry were as refined as the sport itself. Falcons wore jesses, thin leather straps tied to their legs, allowing the falconer to hold or tether them. Tiny hoods covered their eyes when not hunting, keeping them calm and focused. Bells attached to their legs helped locate them in the field. Falconry manuals were written to guide aspiring noblemen. One of the most famous was the Arte Venandi cum Avibus, the art of hunting with birds, penned by Emperor Frederick II in the 13th century. A scholar and ruler, Frederick studied falconry scientifically, observing how birds flew, ate, and reacted to different environments. Despite its prestige, falconry was not without danger. Falcons had sharp talons and beaks capable of drawing blood. Mishandled birds could escape or become aggressive. Training required discipline, knowledge, and a deep understanding of nature. As centuries passed, the use of gunpowder changed warfare and hunting forever. By the 17th century, falconry had begun to decline, replaced by firearms and changing social customs. Yet, the legacy of this ancient art remains, preserved by enthusiasts, historians, and even modern conservationists who use falconry techniques to study and protect birds of prey. So next time you see a hawk soaring overhead, remember, once it was a symbol of kingship, a partner in the hunt, and a testament to the deep connection between humans and nature. When you think of medieval entertainment, jousts and banquets might come to mind, grand spectacles for nobles and kings. But what about the common people? What do they do for fun? Surprisingly, medieval towns and villages had their own versions of amusement parks, bustling fairs filled with music, laughter, games, and even early forms of rides. These weren't just places to relax. They were a rare escape from the brutal realities of daily life. One of the most exciting attractions at any fair was the merry-go-round. But forget Disney magic and glittering lights. This was the 14th century version, powered not by electricity, but by sweat and muscle. Imagine a wooden platform, roughly built and mounted on a central pole. Horses or wooden beasts were attached to it, often carved by local craftsmen. Instead of spinning with the flick of a switch, these merry-go-rounds were pushed by men or pulled by horses running in circles. Children shrieked with delight as they rode up and down, gripping ropes or wooden saddles for dear life. It may sound primitive, but for many, it was the closest thing to magic they'd ever known. But the fair wasn't just about spinning in circles. It was a carnival of chaos, color, and competition. Games were everywhere. And unlike today's ring toss or balloon darts, medieval fair games were often tests of strength, skill, or sheer daring. One popular game was cock throwing. Not exactly what it sounds like. No, it wasn't throwing chickens, though that might have happened too. The game involved blindfolded players trying to hit a live rooster hanging from a rope. The goal was to knock it off its perch with a single blow. If you succeeded, you got to take the bird home, dinner and trophy combined. Another favorite was kicking the barrel, where contestants try to kick a barrel uphill without letting it roll back down. Fail, and you risk being crushed under its weight. Yes, seriously. Then there was stool ball, a precursor to cricket and baseball. A player would sit on a stool and defend a wooden board from thrown balls. Hit the board, and you scored. Miss, and your turn was over. It was fast, competitive, and wildly popular among both children and adults. Dice and card games were also big hits. Though playing card were expensive and mostly owned by the wealthy, dice made from bone or wood were more accessible. Betting was common, sometimes for coins, sometimes for food, and occasionally for personal belongings. Cheating was punished harshly, often with public humiliation or worse. Fairs also featured contests of strength, like lifting heavy stones or wrestling matches. These drew huge crowds who cheered on local champions. Winners earned bragging rights, sometimes a prize, and often the admiration of local women. Acrobats, jugglers, and musicians performed wherever space allowed. Minstrels played lutes and flutes while storytellers spun epic tales of dragons, knights, and lost love. Some performers specialized in slapstick comedy, making audiences laugh with exaggerated antics and crude jokes. And of course, no fair was complete without animal fights. Bear baiting and bull baiting were particularly gruesome but wildly popular. Dogs were set loose on chained animals, and bets were placed on how long the bear or bull could last. These events were brutal, bloody, and disturbing, yet they remained a staple of medieval entertainment for centuries. For 1 or 2 days a year, these fairs offered a temporary escape from hunger, disease, and hard labor. They were chaotic, loud, and sometimes dangerous, but above all, they were fun. The church, however, didn't always approve. Some clerics condemned the games as sinful distractions, claiming they encouraged gambling, violence, and immorality. Still, the fairs persisted, deeply woven into the fabric of medieval life. Even today, echoes of these medieval fairs remain. From carnivals to county fairs, from carnival rides to street performances, the spirit of medieval merriment lives on. So next time you ride a carousel or toss a coin for a carnival game, remember, you're participating in a tradition that began centuries ago, when people fought for every moment of joy in an unforgiving world. When you think of board games, your mind probably jumps to modern classics like Monopoly, Scrabble, or chess. But did you know that medieval Europe had its own rich tradition of board games, played not just by nobles and camel-lit castles, but also by farmers, merchants, and even monks? In a time before smartphones, television, or even printed books, board games were one of the few ways people could relax, challenge their minds, and enjoy some friendly competition. One of the most popular games was backgammon, known in medieval times as tables. Played on a wooden board with ivory or bone pieces, it combined strategy and luck through dice rolls. The game was so beloved that it was often found in noble households, monasteries, and even among traveling traders who carried portable versions made from simple materials. Another favorite was drafts, the medieval ancestor of modern checkers. It was easy to learn but difficult to master, making it accessible to all social classes. You didn't need expensive equipment. A cardboard and stones or coins would do just fine. In fact, archaeologists have found simple drafts boards scratched into castle walls and church pews, showing how common the game was. But perhaps the most iconic medieval board game was chess, though not quite the version we play today. Medieval chess was deeply symbolic, representing the feudal system with pieces like kings, queens, knights, bishops, rooks, and pawns. The queen wasn't always the most powerful piece. Originally, she moved only one square at a time. That changed in the late 15th century, reflecting shifts in European politics where powerful queens like Isabella of Castile began to rise. Chess wasn't just a pastime. It was considered an essential skill for noblemen. It taught strategic thinking, patience, and foresight, all crucial traits for rulers and military leaders. Some manuscripts even compared chess to war, with each move symbolizing real battlefield tactics. Another intriguing game was Nine Men's Morris, which dates back to Roman times but remained wildly popular during the Middle Ages. The goal was to form rows of 3 pieces called mills, allowing players to remove their opponent's pieces. Archaeologists have found hundreds of scratched game boards across Europe, in courtyards, marketplaces, and even inside cathedrals, proving that people loved playing it wherever they went. There was also Fox and Geese, a game of asymmetrical strategy where one player controlled a single fox trying to eat the geese, while the other controlled up to 13 geese trying to trap the fox. It was especially popular among children and was often played using pebbles and hand-carved boards. Monks weren't immune to the appeal of board games either. In quiet monastery halls, away from prayer and study, monks would gather to play games like Rhythmomachia, also known as the philosopher's game. This complex math-based game used numbered pieces and rules based on arithmetic principles. It was seen as both entertainment and intellectual exercise, combining logic and theology in a way that fit within monastic life. Despite the popularity of these games, not everyone approved. Some religious leaders condemned them, claiming they encouraged gambling, idleness, or even sin. In 1254, King Louis IX of France banned games of chance like dice and gambling, believing they distracted people from God. However, such bans rarely worked. People simply played in secret. What makes these medieval board games fascinating is that many of them are still played today, sometimes under different names or with slightly altered rules. The same thrill of outsmarting an opponent, rolling the perfect dice combination, or forming a winning line has survived centuries. So next time you sit down for game night, remember, you're continuing a tradition that stretches back to the castles, villages, and abbeys of medieval Europe. And if you think your opponent is tough, imagine facing someone who trained for years in a world where every move truly meant something. If you thought modern sports were intense, imagine watching a blood-soaked spectacle where the only goal was to see how long an animal could survive while being attacked by dogs, all for the amusement of a roaring crowd. Welcome to animal baiting, one of the most popular and disturbingly violent forms of medieval entertainment. Before football stadiums and concert halls, before even the invention of the printing press, people gathered in town squares, tavern yards, and makeshift arenas to watch animals fight for their lives. This wasn't just a pastime. It was a brutal ritual that combined sport, gambling, and sheer cruelty. The most common form was bear baiting, where a bear was chained to a post in the center of a ring. Ferocious mastiffs or bulldogs were then released to attack it. The bear, wounded and enraged, would try to defend itself by swinging its massive paws, sometimes killing the dogs instantly. Other times, the dogs would swarm it, biting its face and flanks while it roared in pain. The fight could last minutes or hours. Spectators placed bets on how long the bear would last, how many dogs would die, or which dog would land the final blow. Some nobles even bred special fighting dogs, proud of their lineage like today's racehorses. Bear baiting wasn't just a random event, it was a social occasion. Towns hosted these events during festivals, market days, and even royal celebrations. Nobles invited guests to private matches in castle courtyards. It was considered high entertainment, right up there with jousting and feasts. But bears weren't the only victims. Bull baiting was equally popular, especially in England. Bulls were tied to posts or restrained by ropes, forced to endure attacks from packs of dogs trained to bite and hold onto their noses. The goal was to weaken the bull by causing it to bleed out or collapse from exhaustion. Why bulls? Because they fought back fiercely, thrashing and tossing dogs into the air. It was dramatic, chaotic, and horrifying, everything a medieval audience wanted. Even apes and lions weren't safe. Wealthy patrons sometimes imported exotic animals from abroad, staging fights between monkeys and dogs, or even lions and packs of hounds. These rare spectacles drew massive crowds, eager to witness something truly wild. Gambling made the practice even more widespread. Betting rings formed around the arena, with odds changing as the battle unfolded. Winners took home coins, food, or even livestock. Losers often owed debts that could ruin them. Despite its popularity, not everyone approved. Religious leaders condemned animal baiting as sinful, claiming it encouraged cruelty and violence. In 1387, King Richard II banned bull baiting in London, though enforcement was minimal. Bans came and went, but the practice endured. One reason it lasted so long was that it wasn't just about entertainment. It also served a practical purpose. Dogs used in baiting were often bred for work, guarding property, herding cattle, or even hunting. Training them through real combat made them stronger, faster, and more aggressive. In fact, the modern bulldog gets its name from this practice. Originally bred to bait bulls, these dogs had short muzzles, wide shoulders, and powerful jaws, perfect for gripping an animal's nose and holding on until it collapsed. Animal baiting wasn't limited to the wealthy. Tavern owners set up small rings in their yards, hosting weekly matches to attract customers. Beer flowed freely, bets were placed, and the bloodier the fight, the better. Children watched from the edges, learning early that violence was part of life. There were no rules, no referees, and certainly no concern for the suffering of the animals involved. As centuries passed, attitudes slowly began to change. By the 18th and 19th centuries, organized animal baiting declined due to growing concerns about animal welfare and shifting cultural values. Laws were finally passed banning the practice across Europe. Today, we look back on it with horror. But at the time, it was as normal as watching a boxing match or a football game. So next time you see a bulldog with its squashed face and heavy build, remember, its ancestors weren't pets. They were warriors bred for blood sport. And if you think medieval life was romantic, ask yourself, would you really want to live in a world where your idea of fun involved watching animals torn apart for sport? Forget modern stadiums and multi-million-dollar contracts. In medieval Europe, sports were raw, brutal, and often life-threatening. There were no referees, no padded gear, and certainly no timeouts for injuries. If you wanted to test your strength or prove your toughness, you did it the hard way. Wrestling was one of the most popular sports across all social classes. It wasn't just entertainment. It was a test of physical dominance with deep roots in rural festivals, military training, and even religious traditions. Matches took place on muddy fields, village greens, or within castle courtyards. The rules varied by region, but the goal was simple: pin your opponent to the ground or force them out of bounds. In England, the sport was known as Cornish wrestling, while in France, it evolved into Gurin. Wrestlers wore tight leather jackets or heavy tunics, gripping each other's arms or waists. Victory brought not only pride, but also respect, especially among soldiers who trained in grappling techniques for real combat. Boxing, or pugilism, existed long before the Queensberry rules. Unlike today's technical matches with gloves and weight classes, medieval boxing was bare-knuckle chaos. Fighters wrapped their hands in cloth or simply used their fists as they were. Matches could last until one man couldn't stand, and there were no rounds, just endurance and willpower. One particularly violent version was called quarterstaff fighting, where contestants used long wooden sticks in brutal duels that resembled both martial arts and street brawls. These matches were common among peasants and soldiers alike, helping train men for real battles. Another favorite was single-stick play, where competitors wielded wooden blades in fast-paced duels resembling fencing. Though meant to be safer than real sword fights, injuries were still common, including broken fingers, bruises, and even concussions. But perhaps the most extreme form of medieval sport was football, though not the kind you know today. Medieval football was more like an organized riot. Entire towns would gather for chaotic matches played across fields, streets, and sometimes even through villages. There were no set boundaries, no standardized rules, and definitely no penalties for violence. The objective? Get the ball, usually a pig's bladder, to a designated location, like a church or marketplace. Players could punch, kick, bite, throw dirt in faces, anything went. Matches often ended in riots, property damage, and sometimes death. So dangerous was this game that kings like Edward II and Henry IV banned it multiple times, fearing it distracted from archery practice and caused too much disorder. Despite the risks, these sports remained wildly popular because they offered something rare in medieval life: freedom. For a few hours, a peasant could stand toe-to-toe with a noble, wrestle him to the ground, and earn cheers from the crowd. It was rough justice in a rigid world. Tournaments weren't just about jousting. Many included melee battles, mass fights where teams of armored knights and foot soldiers clashed with swords, maces, and clubs. These mock battles were so intense that deaths were common, yet they drew massive crowds eager for spectacle. For younger participants, there were stick-fighting games and stone-tossing contests, teaching boys from an early age how to fight and survive. Even monks got involved in some regions, secretly organizing games during religious holidays when normal restrictions on entertainment were lifted. Victory in any of these sports brought prestige. Winners were celebrated with food, drink, and sometimes even cash prizes. In some villages, champions were exempt from taxes or given land as reward. Losing didn't always mean shame either. If you fought honorably, you earned respect. These sports weren't just about fun. They prepared people for war, built community bonds, and gave the lower classes a rare taste of equality. And though the rules were loose and the dangers real, the excitement was undeniable. So next time you watch a boxing match or cheer at a football game, remember, somewhere centuries ago, a medieval wrestler was throwing his opponent into the mud, surrounded by screaming fans and betting merchants, living by the same thrill, proving who was the strongest, fastest, and toughest of them all. When you think of medieval entertainment, your mind might jump to just feasts or brutal battles. But not all medieval fun involved swords or bloodshed. Some of the most respected minds in medieval Europe sharpened their wits with something far quieter: puzzles and riddles. Long before Sudoku grids and escape rooms, people trained their brains using clever wordplay, logic games, and mathematical challenges. These weren't just idle pastimes. They were tools for education, tests of intelligence, and even ways to impress potential patrons. One of the most famous examples comes from the court of Charlemagne, where scholars like Alcuin of York created collections of riddles to challenge students and nobles alike. His book Propositions ad Equendos Juvens, Problems to Sharpen the Young, contained over 50 logic puzzles designed to teach math and reasoning skills through playful storytelling. Imagine being a young monk in a monastery school, trying to solve this riddle. A man wants to ferry a wolf, a goat, and a cabbage across a river. His boat can only carry one item at a time. If he leaves the wolf with the wolf will eat the goat. If he leaves the goat with the goat will eat the cabbage. How does he get them all across safely? This classic puzzle is still taught today, and it shows that medieval thinkers valued logical thinking as much as we do. Riddles were also popular among nobles and commoners alike. In taverns and royal courts, people gathered around fires to test each other's knowledge with cryptic questions. A wrong answer meant paying a forfeit, usually a round of ale. A correct one earned admiration, and sometimes even small prizes. Here's one from an old English manuscript. I have a little house, wherein I live no householder. No man may enter unless he opens my mouth. The answer? A glove. These riddles often played with language, metaphors, and double meanings. They required not just intelligence, but cultural knowledge, understanding how things worked in daily life, from farming to blacksmithing. Monks, in particular, embraced riddles as both entertainment and spiritual exercise. They believed solving complex puzzles brought them closer to divine wisdom. Some monasteries even held competitions, where monks would try to stump each other with increasingly difficult riddles. But it wasn't all wordplay. Medieval mathematicians and philosophers also developed early forms of board-based logic puzzles. One such example was the game of Rithmamachia, known as the philosopher's game, played on a large board resembling chess. Rithmamachia used numbered pieces and followed rules based on arithmetic and geometry. The goal was to form numerical sequences that represented harmony and balance, concepts deeply rooted in medieval philosophy and theology. It was considered so intellectually valuable that some scholars compared it to studying music theory or astronomy. In fact, Rithmamachia was sometimes used as a teaching tool in universities long before modern math textbooks existed. Another favorite was the magic square, a grid of numbers where each row, column, and diagonal added up to the same total. These squares were more than just puzzles. They were believed to hold mystical properties and were often inscribed onto amulets or worn for protection. Even children got in on the action. While they didn't tackle advanced logic puzzles, they learned simpler riddles passed down through generations. These helped develop language skills, memory, and critical thinking, all without needing books or formal schooling. Despite their popularity, these intellectual games were not always accepted by everyone. Some religious leaders viewed certain puzzles with suspicion, believing they encouraged vanity or wasted time that could be spent in prayer. Still, the tradition endured. As literacy spread and books became more accessible, printed collections of riddles and puzzles began appearing in the late Middle Ages. These books became prized possessions, often gifted between friends or copied by scribes in monasteries. So next time you pick up a crossword or try to solve a brain teaser, remember, you're following in the footsteps of medieval monks, scholars, and even kings who once sat by candlelight, scratching their heads over riddles that still challenge us today. And if you ever wondered what medieval people did when they wanted a break from swords and plagues, now you know. They played with words. In a world filled with hard labor, disease, and danger, medieval people knew how to celebrate, and they did it with music, dance, and wild festivals that turned villages upside down. Forget the image of grim-faced peasants slaving away in fields all day. When the work was done and the harvest secured, medieval Europe came alive with celebration. These weren't just random parties. They were deeply rooted in tradition, religion, and community life. Festivals marked everything from religious holidays like Christmas and Easter to seasonal changes like the beginning of spring or the end of harvest. Some lasted for days, even weeks, turning towns into bustling centers of food, music, and revelry. One of the most important parts of any festival was dancing. Not the stiff, courtly dances of nobles, but wild, energetic group dances that brought everyone together, from lords to peasants. The carol, one of the most popular medieval dances, involved people holding hands in a circle and moving to the rhythm of flutes, tambourines, and drums. It wasn't about elegance, it was about joy. Dancers sang along to songs passed down through generations, celebrating love, nature, and sometimes even mocking authority. Another favorite was the estampi, an upbeat dance performed by both nobility and commoners. It featured rhythmic stomping and quick footwork, often accompanied by lively instrumental music. In some regions, dancers wore bells on their ankles, adding a jingling sound to the performance. But dancing wasn't just for fun, it had symbolic meaning. Many dances mimicked agricultural work, like sowing seeds or harvesting crops, reinforcing the connection between movement and survival. Others told stories of saints, heroes, and mythical creatures. Festivals also brought out the minstrels and troubadours, traveling musicians who entertained crowds with ballads and tales. They played lutes, viols, and shawms, early versions of the oboe, filling town squares with sound. Some minstrels were hired by nobles, while others wandered from village to village, trading songs for food and shelter. And let's not forget the fools and jesters, who kept the mood light with jokes, acrobatics, and crude humor. They poked fun at kings, priests, and peasants alike, often getting away with things no one else could say out loud. Some of the wildest celebrations happened during feast days, especially Feast of Fools and Boy Bishop Day, where social roles were reversed. Children dressed as bishops, servants pretended to be lords, and normal rules were suspended, if only for a day. These events could get very rowdy. Alcohol flowed freely. After all, water was dangerous to drink, so beer and wine were everyday beverages. People danced until their feet hurt, ate roasted meats and spiced breads, and played games like tug-of-war, blind man's bluff, and dice contests. But not everyone approved. Church leaders often condemned these festivals, claiming they encouraged sin, drunkenness, and immorality. In some places, dancing was even banned, though like most bans, enforcement was tricky. Still, the tradition endured because it gave people something rare in medieval life, a break from suffering. For a few hours, a farmer could forget his aching back. A widow could laugh again. A child could watch fire dancers and feel wonder instead of fear. Even in times of plague and war, festivals continued. Some towns held special ceremonies to ward off illness, offering gifts to saints or performing ritual dances meant to appease divine forces. So next time you go to a concert, a wedding, or a street fair, remember, you're continuing a tradition that goes back centuries. The music may have changed, the clothes may be different, and we've thankfully upgraded our plumbing, but the feeling remains the same. Because no matter how hard life gets, people will always find a reason to dance. Long before smartphones and video games, even before the printing press, people found clever ways to pass the time, and one of their favorite tools was a simple deck of cards. Yes, playing cards existed in medieval Europe, though they looked very different from the ones we use today. These weren't mass-produced plastic-coated decks from a convenience store. They were hand-painted, expensive, and often seen as luxury items, status symbols for the wealthy. The first playing cards arrived in Europe around the late 14th century, likely brought over from the Islamic world, where card games have been popular for centuries. By the 1370s, they had spread across France, Germany, and Italy, becoming part of daily life for nobles, merchants, and even some members of the clergy. But unlike modern poker or solitaire, medieval card games used different suits and designs. In Italy, the four suits were cups, swords, coins, and clubs, symbols that still appear in traditional Italian playing cards today. In Germany, they used acorns, leaves, hearts, and bells, while the French eventually settled on spades, hearts, diamonds, and clubs, the system we know now. These early decks didn't have jokers. That came much later. Instead, they usually contained between 40 and 52 cards, with each suit having numbered cards and a few court cards like kings, knights, and queens. Owning a deck was not cheap. Since every card was hand-painted by artisans, only the rich could afford them. A single deck could cost more than a skilled craftsman earned in a year, making a luxury item, not unlike a designer watch or a rare painting. Despite their high cost, card games became wildly popular among nobility. Kings and queens played for entertainment, sometimes even commissioning custom decks made with gold leaf and intricate illustrations. Some royal courts hosted card tournaments, where players competed for prizes and prestige. One of the most common medieval card games was Primera, an ancestor of modern poker and blackjack. The goal was to collect certain combinations of cards to score points, similar to how poker hands work today. Another popular game was Tarot, which originally wasn't about fortune-telling, but about strategy and competition. But not everyone approved of this rising trend. Church leaders and moralists condemned card games, claiming they encouraged gambling, idleness, and vice. In fact, many cities passed laws banning card playing altogether, especially during times of war or plague. But just like bans on dice and drinking, these rules rarely stopped people from playing in secret. As demand grew, card-making techniques improved. Woodblock printing allowed for faster production, making cards more affordable by the 15th century. This meant that even wealthier merchants and townspeople could join in the fun. Cards also became a form of artistic expression. Many surviving medieval decks show incredible detail, with elaborate borders, symbolic imagery, and hand-colored illustrations. Some even included religious scenes or portraits of historical figures. Interestingly, the design of these cards influenced later tarot decks, which began appearing in Italy around the 1400s. These early tarot decks weren't used for fortune-telling at first. They were simply another type of card game, played by aristocrats who enjoyed the challenge of complex rules and strategic play. For the average person, however, playing cards remained a luxury until the printing press revolutionized manufacturing. Before then, if you wanted to gamble or play a game, you either borrowed someone else's deck or played simpler games using dice, sticks, or even carved wooden tiles. Still, the appeal of card games endured. Whether played in candlelit castles or smoky taverns, cards offered a break from hard labor, disease, and the daily grind of medieval life. They provided a way to bond with friends, impress a date, win a little extra coin. So next time you shuffle a deck of cards or play a quick round of gin rummy, remember, you're holding a piece of history, one that has survived wars, plagues, and even the invention of the internet. And if you think losing at poker is brutal, imagine risking your only pair of shoes in a medieval card game and losing. Before poker, before craps, and even before modern casinos lit up the night sky, people in medieval Europe rolled dice for fun, fortune, and sometimes their freedom. Dice games were one of the most widespread forms of entertainment across all levels of society, from peasants huddled around a fire to nobles gambling away their fortunes in candlelit halls. They required no special training, no expensive equipment, and certainly no royal permission, just a pair of dice, a flat surface, and a bit of luck. The dice themselves were often made from bone, wood, or stone, carved by hand and marked with simple numbers or dots. Unlike today's precision-molded plastic cubes, medieval dice varied in shape and fairness. Some were loaded, others were handmade with uneven sides, making every roll a gamble in more ways than one. One of the most popular games was Hazard, an ancestor of modern craps that originated in the Middle East and spread through the Crusades. The rules were simple. Players bet on whether a specific number could be rolled using 2 dice. But unlike today's standardized odds, Hazard had a complex system of winning and losing combinations that changed depending on the main number chosen at the start. Another favorite was 3 Dice Have No Lies, a fast-paced bluffing game where players predicted the outcome of a roll and challenged each other to raise the stakes. It combined elements of chance and deception, making it wildly addictive, especially when money or drinks were involved. For those who preferred strategy over pure luck, there was backgammon, known then as tables. Played on wooden boards with ivory pieces, it mixed dice rolls with tactical movement, offering a balance between fate and skill. Monks played it in quiet monasteries, merchants played it during long trade journeys, and soldiers played it while waiting for battle. Despite their popularity, dice games weren't always legal. Many rulers feared gambling would distract men from their duties, particularly archery practice, which was essential for national defense. In 1388, England passed a law banning games of chance, including dice, claiming they wasted time and encouraged idleness. But like any good ban, this one didn't last. People simply played in secret, often hiding under blankets or behind tavern curtains. Some towns even developed underground gambling dens, where bets were placed not only in coin but in food, livestock, or personal belongings. Dice games also found their way into literature and folklore. Chaucer mentioned them in the Canterbury Tales, describing how characters used dice to settle disputes, make decisions, or simply pass the time. In some cases, dice were even seen as tools of fate. Rolling the right combination could mean success, while a poor roll might foreshadow doom. Cheating, of course, was common. Players used weighted or shaved dice to influence outcomes. Some memorized probability patterns, giving them an edge over less experienced gamblers. Others simply lied about what they rolled, relying on intimidation or quick reflexes to avoid being caught. In prison cells and war camps, dice offered a rare distraction from suffering. Soldiers played while waiting for battle, prisoners gambled away their few possessions, and sailors tossed dice between voyages. For many, it was the only form of control they had in a world ruled by kings, priests, and unpredictable disease. Even religion couldn't stop the appeal of dice. Biblical references show that casting lots, essentially rolling dice, was used to make decisions believed to be guided by divine will. One famous example is when Roman soldiers rolled dice to decide who got to keep Jesus' robe during the crucifixion. So next time you roll the dice in a board game or place a bet at a casino, remember, you're continuing a tradition that goes back centuries. A tradition built on risk, reward, and the eternal hope that luck will be on your side. Because if medieval peasants could find joy in a simple roll of the dice, maybe we can too. When we think of medieval life, we often imagine hardship, disease, war, brutal labor, and filth. And yes, much of that was true. But what we sometimes forget is that these people weren't just surviving, they were living. They laughed, played, danced, and competed. They told stories around fires, challenged each other with riddles, and risked their fortunes on the roll of the dice. They found joy in music, in games, in festivals that turned muddy fields into places of celebration. From the grand chessboards of noble courts to the carved wooden boards scratched into castle walls, from jousting tournaments to blood-soaked bear baiting, from candlelit monastery puzzles to village dances under starry skies. Medieval entertainment was as varied as the people who lived it. What made these games and pastimes so powerful wasn't just the fun they provided, it was their ability to bring people together. A peasant could challenge a knight at drafts. A monk could solve a riddle alongside a king. A child could spin on a merry-go-round while their parents watched with pride. These traditions didn't vanish, they evolved. Chess is still played in schools and online arenas. Jousting lives on in reenactments and fantasy fiction. Archery remains an Olympic sport. Even the simple act of telling a joke or solving a puzzle connects us to our medieval ancestors in ways we rarely realize. So next time you play a board game, attend a fair, or watch a jousting show at a Renaissance festival, remember, you're not just having fun. You're participating in a legacy that stretches back centuries. A legacy built not just on survival, but on joy. And if you ever feel like modern life is too fast, too stressful, or too digital, maybe all you need is a little bit of medieval magic.